Olá, amigos,
Hello, friends, viewers, internet users, Shalom, Shalom. I am Roshi Shai Ben Yehuda, and we are the Israelites of the New Covenant. With us today, Roshi Ezra, and together we are going to talk about the everlasting priesthood of Israel.
É isso aí. Shalom,
Hey everyone,
Shalom àquele que nos assiste, seja você
Shalom to all who are watching us, if you are an internet user, a viewer, or just a listener of this study today. The priesthood of Israel was something established there in chapter 19 of Exodus. We had already spoken about it. When God took the people of Israel after 400 years of his contract with Abraham Avinu, when he made the covenant of parts that also we had already spoken, he made the covenant of Brit Milah, the circumcision, and after said that the children of Abraham would be slaves in a strange land, in this case was in Egypt, and from there they will come out and return to Abraham's land. And when this pilgrimage was happening after the Exodus, there in chapter 12, God then called Israel, the fourth generation after Abraham, called it and made a proposal. Very similar to someone who does a marriage proposal to a lady. We also compare to this with the proposal made to Rebekah by Isaac and Abraham and his matchmaker. So God called Israel and said, if you are for me, keep my commandments. If you are for me, a nation which serves me, then I will make you a holy nation and a priestly nation to all the nations. So God gave the law, and in the end of the chapter 24, God sealed this priestly covenant with the spilled blood of the bullocks, a covenant which stays unto the present days. But I'm saying this to you because there is an idea in the world that God made this covenant with Abraham regard to his nation, a priestly nation, and I repeated, the priestly nation is the one who should represent the true God before the other nations, which should be responsible for the keeping of the Torah, the teachings of God, and transmitting it to all humankind. So this is the whole that God gave to the descendant or the seed of the father Abraham. But in our days, there is an idea that Israel is no longer, around 2,000 years ago, was taken out of Israel this attribution of being the priestly nation and was transferred it to the others, does not belong to Israel anymore. Israel is out. Israel need in their mentality, Israel needs to convert and to ally with these people who today to be the priestly nation. And we were talking, interestingly, about the fact that Israel, being the priestly nation, is that it must keep the Torah.
E essa nação que
And this
supostamente
nation,
hoje
which supposedly
representa a
today
nação sacerdotal,
represents
não
the
conhece
priestly
Torá, não
nation,
guarda
it
Torá, não
doesn't
ensina
know
Torá.
the Torah,
Então, em
doesn't
função
keep the
disso que a gente
Torah,
está falando
and
da
does teach the Torah. So regard to this,
da
we are talking
escolha
about the
do povo de
everlasting
Israel como
chooseness
nação
of the
sacerdotal.
people
Ou
of
seja,
Israel
não
as the
houve,
priestly nation. In other
houve
words,
começo,
there was the
a
beginning,
continuidade
the
durante esses
continuity
20 séculos,
during those
existe essa
20 centuries,
continuidade
and
do
still having this
sacerdócio de Israel,
continuity of
e
the
esse
Israel
sacerdócio
priesthood,
estará ainda
and this
mais
priesthood will be more
operante no reino
active
vindouro.
in the world to
explicar
come.
aqui pro
Okay,
nosso
let's
telespectador
explain to our
exatamente a
audience
configuração
what
daquilo
exactly
que se
is or
entende por
what it
sacerdócio.
means to be the
O
priesthood.
escritor da carta aos Hebreus
The
faz uma
writer of the
comparação que eu
Hebrews
gosto muito de
did a
usar,
comparison
tanto
which
no que
I
se
like to use
refere
a
à
lot,
pessoa de Mashiach,
both as regard
quanto
to the
no que se
Mashiach,
refere
as
a
regard
o povo de Israel.
to the
Capítulo
people of
5 de
Israel.
Hebreus fala
Chapter
assim, porque
5 of
todo sumo
Hebrews says that
sacerdote, sendo
every
tomado entre
higher
os homens,
priest
é
is selected
constituído
from
nas
among
coisas
the people,
concernentes a
and
Deus,
it's
a
pointed
favor
in
dos
matters
homens,
related to
para
God
oferecer
to
tanto
represent
dons
the
como
people,
sacrifícios pelos
to
pecados.
offer
Primeiro versículo
gifts
primeiro.
and sacrifices for
Lá em, no
sins.
Salmo
First verse
147,
1. There
versículo
in
último,
Psalms
diz
147, in
que
the
as
last
nações
verse,
ignoraram os
says that
mandamentos.
the
Nós falamos
nations
sobre isso aqui
ignored
tempo
the
atrás.
commandments.
Ignoraram
We
o seu
spoke
juízo.
about
O
that
seu
a
juízo.
time
Quer
ago.
dizer, em termos
In other words,
assim,
in common
comuns,
terms,
não há nenhuma diferença
doesn't have any
entre a
difference
humanidade
between
como
the
um todo e a nação de
humankind
Israel. A
and
única
the nation
diferença
of
é a postura
Israel.
que a
The
mesma
only
assumiu.
difference is the
Todo homem
choice
nasce
of
igual,
each one
mas
choose.
Israel
All men
foi
born the
formada
same, but
desde Abraão.
Israel
Então,
was
as
made
nações já
from
existiam.
Abraham. So
Pai
the
Abraão
nations
achou
exist
graça
already.
diante dos olhos de
The
Deus, e
father
do pai
Abraham
Abraão Deus
pleaded to
tirou uma
God's
nação.
eyes, and from
Em
him God
termos
took a
normais,
nation.
o povo judeu
In common
não
terms,
difere
the
nada
Jewish people
das
has
demais
no
nações,
difference from
apenas
the
na
other
sua
nations,
postura. Então,
only
significa
by
o quê?
its
Que se o povo
posture.
judeu
So
pode
what does
obedecer a
it
Deus,
mean? Means
qualquer
that if the
nação
Jewish
anterior
people can
também
obey
podia.
God,
E se
any
não
other
fez,
previous
foi
nation
porque
could
não
do
o
it.
quis.
And if they
Então
didn't,
Israel foi
was
chamada
because
para
they
ser
didn't want.
sacerdócio,
So
para
Israel was
mostrar
called
que
to
ela é
be
como
the
qualquer outra
priestly nation
nação,
to show
mas que ela
that it's
seria
the same as
diferente
any
no
other
seu
nation, but
procedimento,
it
assim
should be
como o
different
sacerdote
in its
também o
behavior
era.
as a
Versículo
priest
2
should be.
fala, é capaz
In
de
the second
condoer-se
verse
pelos
says,
ignorantes,
he's able to deal gently
erram,
with those who
pois
are
também ele
ignorant
mesmo é
and
rodeado
are going
de
astray,
fraquezas.
seems
Então,
also is
condoer-se dos
surrounded by
ignorantes
weakness.
faz
So
referência
about
também ao
those who
papel
are
de Israel
ignorant
de
refers
tornar a
also
Torá
to Israel's role.
conhecida a
It makes the
todos os
Torah known
povos.
to all the
Assim como
peoples,
sacerdote
like a priest
precisa ter papel
needs
de
to
exercer
take the responsibility
ensinar ao povo as
and
coisas de Deus,
teach the people
também
about
Israel
God's
deveria
things,
ensinar.
Israel
Agora eu
also
pergunto,
must do the
Nos
same.
dias de
And
hoje,
now I ask Roshishai,
o povo
in our
judeu,
days,
será que ele
has
ainda
the
tem
Jewish
alguma coisa para
people
ensinar para as nações?
something to
Será
teach
que
the
hoje
nation
as
still?
nações
Or maybe
já
the
conhecem a
nations
Deus
today
o
already
suficiente
know
e não
God
precisam
enough
mais de Israel?
to not need Israel anymore?
certeza, Israel
Of
tem
course,
que
Israel
ensinar as nações.
has so
Agora,
many
o que
things to teach the
acontece é o
nation still. But what
reconhecimento
happened
por
is
parte
the
das
need of the
nações.
recognition
A
by
gente
the
tem hoje,
nations.
por exemplo, o
We
Tanar,
have
que é
today,
chamado
for
de Velho
instance, the
Testamento,
Tanakh, what is
né?
so-called Old
E ele
Testament,
é,
that
do que é conhecido
is
por Bíblia,
well known as
ele
the
é a
Bible.
parte mais
It is the
confiável,
most reliable
menos
part,
sofreu,
which
praticamente não sofreu
suffer no
nenhuma
change,
alteração.
that practically
Agora,
not
por quê?
suffer any
Porque
change.
existe
And why?
povo
Because
que detém
there is a
a
people
guarda dos
which
originais
hold the
deste
originals
livro.
writings
Então, aí
of this
ninguém
book.
pode mexer
So this
se
one,
alguém
no
detém
one
a
can
guarda desse
touch.
livro, que é o
If
povo
someone
judeu. Então,
keeps
o
the
povo judeu
originals,
continua
which is the
como
Jewish people.
guardião
So the
dos
Jewish people
escritos
still
sagrados
being
para nós.
the
Agora,
holders of the
o que
Holy
acontece é o
Scriptures
seguinte,
for
as
us.
pessoas acham
But what
que
happened is
Israel
the
não
people
representa
think
mais
that
nada.
Não
Israel
representa mais nada. Agora
no
tem mais uma
longer
coisa, Rosh, chama a terceira
represents
coisa. Existe
anything.
terceiro
But it's other
aspecto
thing.
do
There is
sacerdócio que
a
deve ser
third
levado em conta.
aspect of the
O
priesthood
sacerdote
which
era
must be taken into
responsável por
account.
fornecer
The priest was
o
responsible
sacrifício
to do
pelo perdão do
the
pecado, para
sacrifices
perdão do
for
pecado
forgiveness
pelo
of
povo.
sins for the
Israel
people.
também teve esse papel no
Israel
sentido de
also
que
has this role
Mashiach
in a sense that
nasce
Mashiach
de Israel.
came
Portanto,
from
Israel
Israel.
foi quem
Therefore,
concedeu
Israel
às
was who
nações, através
gave
de
to the
Mashiach,
nations through
perdão de pecados.
Mashiach,
E aí o versículo
the
3º do
forgiveness
capítulo
of
5 de
sins.
Hebreus
And in
fala, por
verse
essa razão
3
deve
of the
oferecer
chapter 5 of
sacrifícios
Hebrews says,
pelos
this is
pecados,
why
tanto
he
do
has to
povo, e aí eu
offer
vou comparar o povo
sacrifices
aqui
for
com as
his
nações,
own sins as
como
well
por si
as for the
mesmo,
sin
ou
of the
seja,
people, and I will compare the people with the
Yeshua, sendo
nations as
judeu,
for himself. Look,
deveria
Yeshua
morrer
being
pela
a
mão do
Jewish
povo de Israel,
person
e muito
must
embora a gente
die by
saiba,
the
a gente
hand
vai
of
falar disso
Israel,
no outro
even though
programa,
we know,
que
and
Israel
we will talk
entregou,
about
né,
this
Israel
in the
não,
other
a
programs,
classe
that
sacerdotal
the
entregou
priestly
Mashiach para
class
morrer pela mão dos
delivered
romanos, e Yeshua não
Mashiach to
morreu pela
die
mão
by
do
the
povo,
hands
mas
of
pela mão
Romans,
de uma
so Yeshua
classe
didn't die by the
sacerdotal.
people's
De
hand, but
qualquer
for a
maneira,
priestly
foi
class.
Israel,
Anyway,
nenhum outro povo
was Israel
quem
and
teve
any
dentro
other
de si
people
varão
who
escolhido
had
por
among
Deus
them
que
a chosen
pudesse
by
servir
God
como
that could
sacrifício pelo
serve
pecado
as
dos
a
homens.
sacrifices for
Então,
sins of
até
men.
nisso, Israel é
So
sacerdotal.
even in this,
Porque
Israel is
quando fala a
priestly,
salvação
because
vem dos judeus, se
when
refere
you say that
ao
the
povo
salvation
judeu,
comes from the
mas também
Jews,
se
it
refere ao
refers to the
Mashiach
Jewish
que vem
people,
do
but
povo
also
judeu.
refers
Então,
to Mashiach who came
descendente,
from the
no
Jewish
caso
people.
falando de Mashiach,
Your
será
descendant,
bendita
here
todas as
speaking
nações da
about
terra.
Mashiach, shall be blessed all
ponto
families
muito
on the earth.
importante que também é usado hoje.
It is a very important
dizer que
point which
Israel
is used today,
perdeu
is
essa
to say that
atribuição de
Israel
Deus
lost
porque pecou.
this assignment
Israel
from
foi
God
escolhido,
because
né?
sinned.
Deus escolheu
Israel was
Abraão, e
chosen,
através de Abraão,
God chose
criou o povo
Abraham,
de Israel
and through
como
Abraham
nação
made the
sacerdotal.
Jewish people,
Mas
made Israel as the
quebrou,
priestly nation. But Israel
o
broke
pacto, a aliança que fez com Deus quanto à
the
obediência à Torá,
covenant which it
e
made
por essa
to God
causa,
in obey the
por
Torah,
ter pecado,
and because of
vamos dizer
this,
assim,
because
Israel
sinned,
perdeu
let's say it like
diante
that,
de Deus
Israel lost
esta atribuição,
before God
esta escolha
this
de ser
assignment,
nação de Deus.
this
Eu quero
chooseness
ver
of
alguns
being
textos
God's
aqui,
nation. And I want to see
começando
some
por
texts
Deuteronômio,
here,
capítulo 4,
beginning with
fala
Deuteronomy
o que
chapter 4,
aconteceria com
which
Israel se Israel
says
pecasse.
what should happen with
O que é que
Israel
Deus
if it sinned.
fala na
What
Torá
God says
que
in the Torah,
sucederia com
what should happen
o povo de
with
Israel se o povo de Israel pecasse.
the
E é
people
muito
of
importante
Israel if
atentar
it sinned.
que é lógico,
And it's very
se
important
Deus
to pay
fala,
attention,
se
of
Deus fala
course,
em algum lugar, tirarei
because
deles
if God
o
says
sacerdócio.
somewhere, I will take away
Eles
from them the
não serão mais o
priesthood,
meu povo escolhido.
they no longer
Beleza?
will be my
Mas vamos ver
chosen
o que
people.
está escrito.
It's all right.
Deuteronômio,
But
capítulo
let's
4,
see what is
do versículo
written. I will
27
read
e
here
28,
in
diz o
Deuteronomy
seguinte,
4, verse
E o
27 and
Senhor vos
28,
espalhará
which said,
entre os povos,
the Lord
e ficareis
will
poucos
scatter
em
you
número
among the
entre
peoples,
as
and
gentes,
only
as
a
quais
few
o
of you
Senhor
will
vos
survive
conduzirá.
among the nations
E ali
to which the
servireis
Lord will drive
a
you.
deuses
There
que são obra
you
das
worship
mãos, da mão de homens,
man-made
madeira
gods
e pedra,
of wood
que não
and
veem,
stone,
nem ouve,
which cannot see
nem
or
come, nem
hear
cheira.
or eat
aí
or
Moshe
smell.
estava falando
Well, there Moses
especificamente
was
que quando o povo
speaking
entrasse na
specifically
terra, ele já fala
of
em
when the
versículo
people
25,
will
eles
come into the
começariam,
land, which says at
porque eles não
verse
expulsariam
25,
todos os
they
povos
did
da terra
not
de uma só vez e
drive
se
all the
contaminariam.
people
E por
out of the
conta
land
disso, no
once,
tempo
because they
futuro,
have the
eles
field.
seriam
And
levados
because
para o
of that, in
exílio
the
e depois para
future,
a
they
diáspora,
will
não é
not
isso?
take away the
Exatamente.
exile
Mas
and
eu quero
into the
continuar a
diaspora,
leitura aqui.
isn't it? But I want to
Então,
continue with
o que
this
você
reading,
falou está
and
aí
what
do
you
versículo
said
20
from
em
verse
diante, falando
20
disso,
onwards.
de que o versículo 25
The verse
fala, quando,
25
pois,
says,
gerardes
when your
filhos
father,
e filhos
father
e filhos,
children
netos,
and
né?
children's
E vos
children and have
envelhecerdes
grow
na terra,
old
e
in the
vos
land, if you
corromperdes, e
act
fizerdes
corruptly
alguma
by
escultura,
making a
semelhança de
curved
alguma coisa, e
image
fizerdes
in the form
mal
of
aos
anything,
olhos do
and by
Senhor
doing
para
what is
provocar a ira.
evil in the
Então Deus
sight
fala o
of
quê?
the Lord
Que
your
ele
God,
seria, eles,
so
o
as
nosso
to
povo seria
provoke him to
espalhado,
anger.
né,
Our people
pelas
will be
nações.
Agora,
spread out
antes
over the
inclusive,
nations.
antes dele
But
espalhar o
before
povo de Israel
God
pelas nações,
spread out
eles
the
tiveram
Jewish
período
people
em
over
que
the
eles
nations,
sofreram
they had a
exílio.
period
Agora, isso aí
of
Foi
seria
uma
exile.
pré-diáspora, eu acredito
That
dessa
was
forma.
a
Deus primeiro
previous
manda eles pro
diaspora.
exílio
I believe
70
in that
anos,
way. God
numa
first
primeira
sent them
chance,
to the
só
exile
então,
for
depois,
70
muito
years
tempo
at the
depois,
first
então, eles foram
chance.
espalhados pela terra,
Only
tudo acontece
after a
do
long
Certo,
time
certo.
they were
Mas
spread
eles
out
iriam,
over
aqui
the
no
earth
caso
as it is
especificamente, está
nowadays.
falando
But
de
here,
uma
in this
idolatria
situation,
que
is
começaria
talking
ali
about
dentro
an
da
idolatry
própria terra
which
de
should
Israel.
begin
Como você
inside the
falou,
land of
por conta
Israel,
de
as you
os
said,
moradores que não
because
foram
some people
totalmente
who
expulsos,
wasn't
né?
completely expelled
Mas aí
from
a
there.
consequência, o
But the
castigo por
consequence,
essa
the
idolatria
punishment for
seria
that
a dispersão
idolatry
do povo.
will be the
Seria o
dispersion
exílio
of the
babilônico,
people,
enfim.
which will be the Babylon exile and after the diaspora. But what happened? The punish here, the main punishment for the sins of the people was to spread them out to many places. But now comes the interesting part, that is the verse 29 and 30.
que nós vamos
20
ler
to
agora.
30, which we'll read now.
Então dali buscarás
But
ao Senhor
if
teu Deus,
from
e o
there you will
acharás,
seek the Lord
quando o
your God,
buscares
you
de
find
todo o teu
him if you
coração
seek him
e
with
de
all
toda
your
a tua
heart
alma.
and with all your
E
soul.
quando estiveres em
And when you
angústia,
are in
e todas
tribulation
estas coisas te
and all
alcançarem,
these things come
então
upon
no
you,
fim de
in the
dias
later
te
days
virarás para o
you
Senhor
will
teu
return
Deus e
to the
ouvirás
Lord
a
your
sua
God
voz.
and obey his voice.
Porquanto
For
o Senhor teu Deus é
the
Deus
Lord your God
misericordioso,
is
e
a
não
merciful God.
desamparará, e
He
nem
will
te
not leave
destruirá,
you
e nem
or
se
destroy you
esquecerá
or
da aliança que
or
jurou
forget the
a teus
covenant.
pais.
Agora, Ruth, todo mundo acha que a Galute ela só tem
Everyone thinks
objetivo
that the Galut
ruim,
had
que é o
only a bad
espalhamento de
goal.
Israel pelos povos,
That
só
is
tem
the
objetivo
scattering
ruim.
of Israel over the
Mas eu
nations
quero ler
had only
aqui
a bad
texto
goal.
que está
But
em
I want to
Miqueias,
read a
capítulo
text
5,
which is in Micah
verso
chapter
7 e
5,
8, que
verse
diz
7
assim:
and 8,
O
which
restante
said,
de Jacó
Then the remnant of
estará
Jacob
no meio de
will
muitos
be among
povos,
many peoples,
como orvalho
like
do
dew
Senhor,
from the
como
Lord,
chuvisco
like
sobre a
showers
erva,
on
que não
vegetation,
espera pelo
which do
homem nem
not
depende
wait
dos
for
filhos dos
man or
homens.
delayed
O
for
restante
the
de
sons
Jacó
of man.
estará
The
entre as
remnant of
nações,
Jacob
no
will be
meio de
among the
muitos
nations,
povos, como
among many
leão entre os
peoples,
animais das
like a
selvas,
lion among the
como
beasts of the
leãozinho entre
forest,
rebanhos
like a young
de
lion
ovelhas, o
among
qual,
flocks
se
of
passar,
sheep,
pisará
which,
e
if he
despedaçará
passes
sem que
through,
haja
tramples down
quem
and tears,
os
and
livre.
there
Versículo
is
9. A
none
tua
to
mão se
rescue.
exaltará
Verse
sobre teus
9. Your
adversários,
hand
e
will
todos os
be
inimigos
lifted
serão
up against your
eliminados.
adversaries,
Ou seja,
and all your
Israel,
enemies will
o
be
fato
cut
de Israel
off.
ter
The
sido
fact that
espalhado
Israel
no meio
it
dos
was
povos,
scattered
se por
among the
lado foi uma
nations,
forma de
if
Deus
one side was a
punir a
way which
Israel e
God
de
did
exortar a
to
Israel
punish
como filho,
Israel
por
and
outro lado,
exalted Israel as
trouxe
a
bênção
son,
do Shishai
on the other side
para as
brought
nações.
blessings for Shishai
Porque o
to the
fato de Israel
nations,
estar
because
entre
the
as
fact that
nações
Israel is
trouxe às
among the
nações a
nations
possibilidade
brought to
de
the
conhecer a
nations the
Torá.
possibility to
Só
knowing the
imagina se
Torah.
Israel não
Can you
tivesse
imagine if Israel
no
was
meio dos
not
povos? Veja
among
bem,
the
a religião
peoples?
hindu,
Look, the
uma
Hinduism,
religião muito
a
antiga,
very old
mas que só é
religion, but
conhecida
it's only
praticamente na
known in
Índia,
India
porque os
because the
hindus estão lá.
Hindus are there.
Israel foi
Israel
espalhado
was
no meio dos
scattered
povos, de
among
onde
the
quer que o
peoples.
povo judeu
Wherever
esteve,
the
foi
Jewish
perseguido,
people
mas por outro
was,
lado,
it was
a Torá se tornou
persecuted. But
conhecida.
in the other
Ao
side, the
semear
Torah get
Israel no
new
mundo,
and spread
através da
Israel out
diáspora,
in the world
Deus
through the
semeou
diaspora.
também
God
a
also
Torá
spread
no
the
meio
Torah
dos
out
povos,
among the
como
nations
se fosse uma
as
espécie
a
de
kind of
testemunha
witnesses
mesmo
of the Torah
da
among the
Torá no meio dos
nations,
povos, tornando as
making the
nações
nation
indesculpáveis diante
unexcusable
da Torá.
before the Torah.
Exatamente. Agora eu quero
Exactly.
mais
I
uma
want
vez
to
aqui
focus
enfocar,
again,
bater
Hoshi
nessa
Ezra,
tecla, que Deus diz o
that God
seguinte,
said that
que ele não destruiria, capítulo 4,
in chapter 4,
de
verse 31 of Deuteronomy,
que ele
Devarim,
não
that he will
destruiria,
not
nem
leave
se
you or
esqueceria
destroy you
da
or
aliança
forget
que
the
jurou seus
covenant
pais.
that he
O tema do
swore
nosso
to your
programa hoje
fathers.
é
The
a
topic
aliança
of our program
perpétua.
today is the
Ele
everlasting
não
covenant.
destruiria a
He
aliança.
will not destroy
Ele
the
pune o
covenant.
povo, ele
He punished the
castiga o
people,
povo,
castigate
mas
the
por
people,
amor da
but
aliança
by
que ele
the
fez
love
com
of the
Abraão,
covenant which
ele
he
não
made with Abraham,
cancela,
he does not
ele não
destroy
desiste de
or
Israel,
give up of
ele não
Israel.
cancela o
He does
pacto,
not cancel
ele
the
não cancela
covenant. He
Israel
does
como
not
seu
cancel
povo.
Israel as his
Exatamente.
people.
E no
Exactly.
programa anterior,
And in
inclusive,
previous
Roshai, nós
program,
falamos
Hoshishai,
que
we
Israel é
said
para
that
Deus como
Israel is to
filho,
God as a
né?
son,
E que Deus
and God
exorta o seu
exalted
filho a quem
his
ama.
son
Então,
who
que
loves.
pai,
Which
nós perguntamos
father?
isso no programa
We did
passado,
this
que pai
question before.
que quando o filho
Which
faz uma
father,
coisa
when a
errada, ele
son does
deserda
a
o
wrong
filho.
thing, he
O pai, ele
disinherits
exorta
his
o
son.
filho,
The
mas
father
sempre a exortação
exalts
de um
the
pai que
son,
o ama
but the
é com o
father's
objetivo de o
exhortation
trazer
who
para
loves his
perto
son is
e de
aiming
reaver
to bring
a sua
him
identidade.
closer and recover
Continue
his
conosco.
identity. Stay with us. This is the Or Teshuvah Program. Enjoy the good times of our worship dancing.
Guiando e salto vema kol Hashem Hashem abeavoy Hashem lo keizoy mele 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 Hashem lo keizoy mele 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 Ben masoy ben koy masoy Ay 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 mele 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 Hashem lo keizoy mele 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 Ben masoy ben koy masoy da col polo chiato pillato vive in collezione chiato e salto ma col Hashem mi chiama me a voi Hashem lo che sono belle belle da col polo chiato pillato vive in collezione.
Continuando então o nosso
Then
programa,
continuing
a
our
gente falava
program,
aí
we spoke
de
about
Deus
God
castigando o seu povo pela
punishing His
desobediência,
people by the
mandando o seu
disobedience,
povo, espalhando o seu
scattering
povo entre as nações
His
em
people
função
among
da
the nations
idolatria, em
because
função
of
dos
the idolatry,
costumes pagãos
the pagan
que o nosso
costumes
povo
that our
assimilaria,
people will
e depois
assimilate, and
o
after
ampliaria nas terras por
will
onde fossem
magnify
espalhados.
it in the lands
E
where
nós
they will be scattered,
focamos, eu vou ler
and
aqui,
we
Rocheza,
focus,
em
and I will
Levítico,
read
no capítulo 26,
in
no
Leviticus
versículo
chapter 26 from
38 a
verse
41,
38 to
novamente, mais um
41,
texto onde Deus
again
fala
another
a
text where
respeito
God
desse
spoke
castigo de Israel
regarding this
e da
Israel
possível
punishment
volta
and the
dele
possible return
a agradar ao
and
Eterno
please
seu
their
Deus.
God.
Diz o texto:
The text says,
E
"You will
perecereis entre as
perish among the
gentes,
nations.
e a terra
The
dos
land
vossos
of your
inimigos
enemies
vos
will
consumirá.
devour you.
E aqueles
And
que entre
those
vós
of you
ficarem se derreterão pela sua
Will waste away
iniquidade nas
by
suas
their
terras,
iniquity
nas terras
and the
dos
lands
vossos
of their
inimigos,
enemies,
e pela
and
iniquidade de
also
seus
because
pais,
of the iniquity
com
of their
eles se
fathers, they
derreterão.
will waste away.
Então confessarão a
If
sua
they confess
iniquidade
their
e a
iniquity
iniquidade
and
dos
the
seus
iniquity
pais.
of their fathers,
Detalhe importante.
this is an important
Com
detail,
que as suas transgressões,
with their
com as suas
unfaithfulness,
transgressões, com que
which they
transgrediram
made
contra mim,
toward me,
como também
which
que andaram contrariamente para
made
comigo.
against me,
Eu também
then
andei
so I
com
sent
eles
them
contrariamente
into the
e os
land
fiz entrar na terra dos seus
of their
inimigos.
enemies.
Se então o seu coração incircunciso se humilhar,
Then, when their
e então
uncircumcised
tomarem
hearts
por
are
bem
humbled,
o castigo
and if
da
they
sua
pay for their
iniquidade.
iniquity.
Aí eu vejo uma
Well,
coisa
in
interessante.
there I
nisso aí.
see an interesting
Deus,
thing
ele
God has
estabeleceu
established
com o
with the
povo
Jewish
judeu
people,
a aliança
the covenant
na
in their
carne
flesh
por causa do
because
pai
of the
Abraão.
father Abraham.
Mas
But
a
the
aliança
covenant
da
of the
circuncisão, ela só
circumcision,
pode ser feita mediante
the circumcision
aliança
of
da
the
circuncisão
heart,
no coração,
it can be
ela só
made
pode
in
ser
two
feita de
ways.
duas formas.
First,
Primeiro,
by a
de uma
sincere
intenção
intention
sincera
of the
do
person
indivíduo
and the
e
action
a
of the
ação
Ruach
do Ruach
HaKodesh.
HaKodesh.
And then
Então,
would miss
faltaria
for the
para o
people of
povo de
Israel
Israel,
in
em
a
algum
certain
momento
time
de sua
of its
história,
history,
a
the circumcision of the
coração.
heart.
Mas
But all
todos
the
os outros
other
pactos
covenants will keep
continuariam persistentes, de forma que
in a way
o
that
que aconteceria com Israel
what would happen
caso Israel
with
se
Israel
arrependesse,
if Israel
né? A sequência do
repents?
texto vai dizer isso. O que acontece com Israel
What would happen
caso
with Israel if
se arrependa?
Israel repents?
Eu vou ler, então, em Levítico,
I will read
capítulo
in Leviticus
26,
chapter
versículo
26,
42,
verse
que diz o
42,
seguinte:
which says,
Também eu me
Then
lembrarei
I will remember
do meu
my
concerto
covenant
com
with
Jacó,
Jacob,
e também do
and
meu
also my
concerto,
covenant
da minha
with
aliança
Isaac,
com
and
Isaac, e
also
também da minha
I
aliança
will
com
remember my
Abraão me
covenant
lembrarei,
with Abraham,
e da terra
and
me
I will
lembrarei.
remember the
Ou
land.
seja, a
In
terra
other
no sentido
words,
de que eles
they
voltariam para sua
would
terra.
return
A
to
aliança
their
de
lands.
Abraão,
The
Isaac e
covenant
Jacó
of
se refere
Abraham,
a que
Isaac,
nele
and Jacob
seriam
refers that
benditas
in
todas as
him
nações
shall
da
be
terra.
blessed
Se
all
refere ainda a
families
uma
on the earth,
nação
and also
sacerdotal.
refers
E por fim,
to a priestly nation,
Israel
and it in the
continua
end,
sendo,
Israel
até os dias
is
de
still
hoje,
being until
o
now
povo de
the
Deus.
people of God. Israel
não
does not
deixa de
cease
ser o
to
povo
be
de Deus.
God's people.
Não há base bíblica
There is no
para
biblical
uma
basis
afirmação
for an
que tente
affirmation
dizer
in
que Israel
try to
tenha
say
sido
that Israel
substituída
was
por outra
replaced for
instituição,
other
por outro
institution,
povo,
for other
ou por
people,
conjunto
or
de
a group
gentios.
Gentiles.
Não há isso na Bíblia. Na
Don't
verdade,
have these in the
sequer
Bible.
há
In fact,
aliança
doesn't
na
have
Bíblia
any
que seja
covenant in the
dirigida
Bible
a
which
qualquer
is for the
gentil. Vamos ver
Gentiles.
isso em
We will
programas
see in
futuros,
future
que, na
programs
verdade,
that
todas
which
as
in
alianças
fact
são
all the
com Israel,
covenants
mas
are made with
alcançam os
Israel,
gentios
but
no
reach the
momento em que o gentio
Gentiles
se
in the
encontra
moment when the
querendo
Gentile
se achegar
want
a
to be
Deus,
close
se
to
achegar
God
ao seu
and be
povo,
closer
dizer
to
como
His
Ruth,
people.
teu Deus
Like
é o meu
Ruth,
Deus, teu
your
povo é
God is my God
Interessante,
and your
Rocheza, eu
people
tava
is my
prestando atenção no
people. I was
versículo
paying
40,
attention in
diz
verse
assim,
40,
então
which says,
confessarão a sua
but
iniquidade
if
e a
they
iniquidade de
confess
seus
their
pais
iniquity
com as
and
suas
the iniquity
transgressões.
of
Quer
their
dizer,
fathers in
isso aí
their
significa que esse
teaching, it
período que
means
Israel
that this
ficaria
period where
espalhado
Israel
entre
will
as
be
nações era um
scattered
período
over the
longo, de
nations
gerações.
should be a long
E quando
period,
essa última
generations,
geração
and the last
acordasse,
generation
caísse em si,
awakes,
tomasse a
takes
decisão
the
de fazer uma
decision
Teshuvah, um
into
retorno
Teshuvah,
a Deus,
return
eles
to God.
confessariam,
They will
reconheceriam
confess.
não só as suas
They will
transgressões,
recognize
como,
not
como
even
também
their
as
sins, but
transgressões dos
also
seus
the
pais.
sins of
Agora,
their
hoje em dia,
fathers.
nós vemos
Yeah,
muito, nós
today
vivemos
we
hoje
see
a
a
era
lot,
da
and we
diáspora,
live in the
a
time
era
of
da galut,
diaspora. the time of the Galut, which resulted in the scattering of the Jewish people among the nations, and a good part by the apostasy and by the conversion, many times forced to other religions, or even a pagan assimilation, which our people suffered along these 2,000 years of diaspora. A situation very easy to emphasize is the case of the Sephardi Jews who dwelled in Spain and Portugal and were converted by force to the Christianism. But today, there is a phenomenon of a spiritual order that in the hearts of many Jews' descendants, they create a yearning, a desire to come back home, something that we cannot explain, something that born and something that wants to return to its religion. And the Israeli congregation of the New Covenant see itself into this role to help, to be a light to these people, Jewish descendants who also want to return, isn't it?
Esse é o nosso trabalho.
This is a duty. But we are going to talk about that when we will talk about the New Covenant. Another interesting detail in the text is that if their uncircumcised hearts are humbled, you see, it talks about uncircumcised hearts. Because circumcision of the heart is one thing, the circumcision of the flesh is another. The circumcision of the flesh exists. When you say that it's everlasting, it means that our entire system also is everlasting. Because, for instance, a Jewish person, to circumcise his son, he needs a mohel. So it's necessary to have a system, and also needs a synagogue, needs a rabbi. It means a continuity somehow.
Institucional também.
Institutional continuity. The heart is uncircumcised by the deeds, by the distance, or they are Jews but are not observant. So the heart is uncircumcised. But if this heart desires returning, if they humble themselves, as God said, and return, what he promised, I will remember my covenant with Jacob, and I will remember my covenant with Isaac, and my covenant with Abraham, and I will remember the land. In other words, the marriage of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob justified the everlasting covenant with God, with all the Jewish people. So it explained what I asked in the beginning. If Israel sinned, will God cancel the covenant? Would God cancel the purpose and call our people, Israel, to be a priestly nation just because Israel sinned? So why the humankind today has in their mind that Israel has nothing more, that the priesthood is in the hands of other people today, which doesn't have the Torah? And you mentioned it in previous programs that God has established a concept with Israel to fulfill His will, to obey His Torah, and I said he got married with Israel, and doesn't make sense God get divorced of His people, Israel, because allegedly they didn't obey the Torah and get married with other people which not obey the Torah. It's even worse. And I want to emphasize another thing. All sins which Israel may have committed, all the occasions which any generation that Israel may have committed has to do with one thing in common. All of them are related to the coexistence of Israel with other nations. So who did the Jewish people stay away from God in some stage of its journey was precisely the nations which today want to make up a situation that Israel was rejected by God. So it doesn't make sense. The few fragments of the Jewish history where Israel had to be punished somehow, like the diaspora and any other punishment,
tem a ver com
has
seu
to
contato
do
com as
with
nações.
its
Então, ou
contact
seja,
with the nations.
Israel
So,
hoje é
in
perseguido,
other
por
words,
exemplo, foi
Israel
perseguido na
was
Inquisição, foi
persecuted
perseguido
in
no
the
Holocausto.
Inquisition,
Não foi
was
perseguido pelo que fez
persecuted
de
in the
errado.
Holocaust,
Foi
was not
perseguido pelo que fez
persecuted for
certo.
what he did
Por
wrong,
exemplo, na
but was
Inquisição eles eram
persecuted
perseguidos
for
porque
what he
acreditavam
did
no único
right.
Deus,
In the
porque
Inquisition,
ousavam
they
guardar
were
o Shabat,
persecuted
porque
because they
ousavam
believed in
guardar
only
uma
one
dieta
God, because they
judaica.
dared to
E
keep
eram
the Shabbat,
descobertos por
because they
causa
dared
disso
to keep
e
a
porque
Jewish
se negavam a
dietary,
se prostrar
and they were
diante de
revealed
ídolos
because of that,
estabelecidos
and
pelo
refused to
cristianismo
bow down
romano.
before idols
Também
created
no
by the
Holocausto,
Roman
foram
Catholics.
perseguidos por
Also,
serem
in the Holocaust,
judeus.
were
E aí o
persecuted
Holocausto
for
sequer
being
levou em conta
Jews. Took
questões
into account
religiosas.
religious
Então, é muito
issues. So
diferente
it is very
daquele
different
povo
from
judeu que
that
foi levado
people
para o
who
exílio
was taken
babilônico,
to the
que estava
Babylonian
numa
exile,
situação
which was
de afastamento
very
religioso.
distant from
O povo
the
judeu que é
religion.
perseguido
The
hoje
Jewish
é
people who is
perseguido por causa de
persecuted
sua fé.
today is persecuted
Então, e aí
because
você
of
falou
its
uma coisa
faith.
importante.
Well,
Você vê que no
you said an
Egito, o
important thing.
castigo que
You
foi
see, in Egypt,
colocado ao
the
nosso
punishment that
não
was
se
placed to
compara
our
com o
people
castigo
does
que foi
not compare
colocado,
with the
nesses
punishment
séculos
suffered
agora.
during
Exato.
these
Você veja bem, a
centuries.
punição
You see,
aplicada a
the
Israel, por
punishment
exemplo, o
applied to
Holocausto,
Israel,
né?
for example,
Uma
the
coisa
Holocaust,
terrível, o
it was a
Holocausto,
terrible thing
onde 6
where
milhões
6
de
million
judeus
Jews were
foram
killed,
mortos de maneira foram
Brutal.
brutally
torturados e
killed,
mortos
brutally
brutalmente.
tortured.
Mas as pessoas que
But
estavam de
people that
alguma
were
maneira
somehow
envolvidas
involved
no
in the
Holocausto
Holocaust,
professavam a religião
they
cristã.
were Christians.
Esse é um grande
This
problema
was a big problem.
para que um judeu
To a
possa
Jewish
chegar à
person,
compreensão
understand
do verdadeiro
about the true
Messias,
Messiah,
do Yeshua que
about
viveu há 2000
Yeshua who
anos,
lived
que não
2000
tem
years
nada a ver
ago,
com o
that has
construído
nothing to do
pelas
with the
religiões
one made up by
ao
the
longo desses
Christian
anos.
religions during
Então, é
these years.
inconcebível
It is
o tamanho do castigo
unconceivable
que tem
the
sido
great
aplicado ao povo
punishment
judeu,
that
né?
the Jewish
E
people
depois
has
você
been
tem aí a
suffered.
Inquisição,
And also
né?
there is the
Inclusive com a
Inquisition,
separação dos
with the
familiares,
separation of
com a
family,
conversão
with the
forçada.
forced
Nosso povo
conversion.
teve no Egito,
Our people has been
mas não
in
foi
Egypt,
forçado a se
but they
converter à
were
religião
not
dos
forced
egípcios.
to convert to their religion.
Agora,
They were
na
free in that
Inquisição, o
way,
povo judeu foi
but in
levado
the Inquisition's time,
foi
the
forçado
Jewish
a
people
uma
was taken, was
confissão.
forced to confess.
Na
In
Inquisição,
the
eles foram
Inquisition, they
obrigados
were
a
forced
assimilar
to
uma
assimilate
nova
a
fé.
new
Agora, tem
faith.
uma coisa
But there is one
que eu quero
thing,
falar
and
que
I
é o
want to
seguinte,
say that
ninguém
no one
consegue
can
tirar
take
do
away
povo
from the
judeu
Jewish
a
people
sua
their
fé.
faith.
Por mais que o povo
Even the
judeu
Jewish
morra,
people
por mais que
die
ele seja
brutally
brutalmente
martyred,
martirizado, por mais que ele seja
or even
perseguido,
persecute,
todo judeu
all Jew
que tem
who
realmente
really
sua
has a
conexão com
connection
Deus,
with
conexão
God,
com o Eterno,
connection with the
ele
Lord,
morre,
he
mas
died,
não nega o
but
seu
do not
Deus.
deny his
E
God.
aqueles que por algum
And for
motivo,
those for
para
some
salvar sua
reason
vida,
to save their
tiveram que
lives,
negar
had to
sua fé
deny their
judaica,
Jewish
tiveram
faith,
que
had
fingir
to pretend
uma
a conversion
a esse suposto
to this
cristianismo.
Christianism.
Hoje,
Today,
os frutos
the
disso
results
mostram
of
que
it
até
shows
mesmo
that
isso
even
teve
this
seu
had
propósito,
its
para que os
purpose to the descendants
desses
of
que
those
foram
who
convertidos
were
à força
converted by force
encontrassem vida
found
para que
life
pudessem
so that
retornar.
they could
Então, hoje, esse
return.
fenômeno
So
do
today this
retorno
phenomenon
do
of
judeu
returning
sefaradi,
of the
também
Sephardi
esse retorno
Jews
de
and
todas
also
as
the
nações,
returning
em todas as
of the
nações, há
nations,
hoje
because in
vestígios
all
do povo de
nations there are
Israel
traces
espalhado.
of the people
Há
of Israel
mover. Claro
scattered.
que nos dias
There
do
is a
Mashiach,
move in the
ele
days of
quem
Messiah.
trará de volta
He
todos
will
eles,
bring
mas já
back all of those.
perceptível.
But it is
Como
already
disse Moshe,
apparent.
Miquetes
How
e
said
Amim,
Moses
nos
in the
últimos
Piket Yamim,
dias,
on the
nos
last
dias do
days,
fim,
on the end
haverá
days,
uma
we'll have a
grande,
great,
uma maciça,
a massive
processo de
process
retorno
of returning
de
of Israel
à
to
sua
its
fé, à
faith,
sua
to its
identidade, à sua
identity, to its
Então,
culture.
Roches, é muito importante, então,
It's
a gente
very
analisar
important to
que todo
analyze
esse castigo,
that all this
eu quero ler
punishment,
Joel aqui
and I
no
want to read the
capítulo,
Joel in
Joel
chapter
capítulo 3,
Joel chapter
que todo
3,
castigo
that all
aplicado
punishment
ao povo de Israel
applied to
espalhado
the
entre as
people of
nações,
Israel is scattered
por
over
ou
the
por outro
nations for different
é lógico
reasons.
que Deus está permitindo
Of
que
course,
Israel
God
passe
is
por essa
permitting that
punição,
Israel
vamos dizer
pass
assim.
through this
Mas todo
punishment,
castigo
let's say
que é
that.
aplicado a
But all
Israel, Deus está
punishment
vendo.
which is
E
applied
Deus
to
vai
Israel,
cobrar
God
das
is watching,
nações.
and God
É como
will
assim, olha,
charge the
meu filho errou,
nations.
você
It's
pode
something like, my
bater
son
nele,
made
mas
mistakes,
bata
and you
com
can
amor,
punish
devagar,
him,
porque eu tô
but
vendo.
beat him with
Se você
love,
bater
because
demais, eu
I'm
vou cobrar de
watching.
você.
If you beat too
Então é
much,
isso
I
que a
will
gente
charge
sente
you.
aqui na
So
profecia
it's
de Joel,
something like this.
no
We can
capítulo
feel
3º,
here in
versículo
Joel's
2º, que diz o
prophecy,
seguinte:
in chapter 3, verse
Congregarei
2, which
todas as
says,
nações
I will gather
e as
all the
farei descer
nations,
ao vale
and
de
I will bring them
Josafá,
down to the
e
valley
ali
of
com elas
Jehoshaphat,
entrarei em
and I will
juízo
enter
por
into
causa do meu
judgment
povo
with them
e
there,
da
on
minha
behalf
herança
of my
Israel,
people,
a
my
quem eles
heritage
espalharam entre as
Israel,
nações
because they have
sobre a terra.
scattered them
E aí
among
vai,
the
né?
nations
Então Deus
and have
promete o quê?
divided
Entrar em
up
juízo
my
com as
land.
nações
What
por
has
causa
God
do seu
promised?
povo.
Enter into judgment with the nations because of his people. They had also cast lots for my people, traded a boy for a prostitute, and sold a girl for wine that they may drink. So it really talks about a brutal situation that the people, the nation, will mock
sobre a diáspora
about
do
the
povo
Jewish
judeu, né?
diaspora.
Inclusive,
And
há
also,
uma referência
there is a
essa
reference to the diaspora
uma lenda
when a Christian
cristã diz,
legend says,
a lenda do judeu
the
errante,
legend of
de
the
que o judeu
wandering
foi
Jew,
condenado
that
a
the
vagar
Jew was
pelo
condemned
mundo
to wander
sem
the
lugar
world
para
without
repousar
place,
sua cabeça,
with no
né?
place
E
to
aí,
lay
claro,
his head.
criou-se aí
And of
uma
course,
série
has been
de
created a number of
justificativas para essa
justifications
repulsa,
for
para
this
esse
reputation, for
rompimento
this
da aliança de
disruption
Deus com o povo
of
judeu,
God's
e entre
covenant
eles
with
está
the
tema
Jewish
que nós vamos
people.
tratar mais em outros
And among
programas, que é
these,
o fato do
that
povo
is the
judeu
fact
ter
that the Jewish
supostamente
people has
negado
allegedly
Jesus, matado
denied
Jesus.
Jesus,
Vamos falar
killed
sobre isso
Jesus.
lá
We
na
will
frente,
talk
né?
about it
Mas o
later.
importante aqui é
But what is
enfatizar,
important here
Deus
is
continua
emphasize that God is still
mantendo
keeping
até os
unto
dias de
today
hoje
his
sua
covenant
aliança
with the
com o
people
povo
of
de Israel.
Israel.
Agora, a última
So now the
investida
last
das
attack
nações
of the
contra
nations
Israel
against
vai ser
Israel
no chamado
will be the
Armagedon.
Armageddon
A
Vale de
definitiva
Josafá,
é
né?
o Vale de Josafá.
in the valley of
E aqui
Jehoshaphat.
no profeta Zacarias, no profeta
And
Zacarias,
here
no
in
capítulo
Zechariah
12,
chapter
ele fala
14,
daquele
he says
momento
about
em
the
que
time that
ajuntarei
I will
todas as
gather
nações
all the
contra
nations
Jerusalém.
against
Capítulo
Jerusalem.
14, porque eu
Chapter
ajuntarei
14,
todas
I
as
will
nações
gather all the
para
nations to
peleja
fight
contra
against
Jerusalém.
Jerusalem.
14,
Chapter
versículo
14,
Então
verse 2.
esta será a última investida das nações
This
contra
should
o
be
povo
the
judeu.
last attack of the
Possivelmente
nations
chegarão a
against
uma
the Jewish
conclusão
people. Possibly they
de que
get into a conclusion
se
that
aniquilarem a nação de
annihilate the
Israel,
nation of Israel,
problemas
the
do mundo
world's
vão
problem will end.
Israel é o único
Israel
problema
is
da
the
humanidade.
only problem
Provavelmente
of the
chegarão a
humankind.
esta conclusão.
Probably they
As
will
nações
get into this
entenderão isso e
conclusion.
vão se
The nations
investir
will
contra
understand this.
o povo
They
Israel.
will
Nós
attack
sabemos que o povo
Israel.
Israel
We
passou
know
pelo
that
processo da
Israel
restauração,
passed through a
se
restoration
reergueu como
process,
nação em
raised up against
1948,
us
e está aí
again,
lutando
raised
para
up
sobreviver.
again
Mas
as a
as
nation
nações
in
não estão
1948,
conscientes
and
e
it is
vão
until now
tentar,
fighting to survive.
uma última
But the nations
tentativa de
are not
aniquilar,
happy.
de
They will
varrer
try
Israel
the
do
last
mapa, de varrer
attempt
Israel
to
para o mar.
annihilate,
E
to
aí
wipe
Deus
out Israel on the
entrará
earth, to
em defesa
wipe out
do seu
Israel
povo.
to the sea,
O que
and God
nós
will
devemos
come to
fazer?
protect His
Nós
people.
devemos estar
What do we
atentos
have to do?
às
We should
profecias
be
que são como
aware
uma
of
luz
the
que
prophecies.
alumia
The
lugar
prophecies
escuro,
are
que alumia o
lights
desconhecido.
that illuminate dark
No próximo
places,
bloco,
that
nós vamos
illuminate
falar
the unknown.
sobre
In the
estes
next
2000
session,
anos,
we will talk about
sobre a
this
nova aliança que
2000
Deus
years, about the new
faz com
covenant
Israel,
that God did
e o
with
que vem
Israel,
a ser
and
essa
what
aliança,
is the new covenant,
Israel
and if Israel
está
is
fora
out
desse
of
período.
this time.
Continue
Stay with us. Hello, friend. Are you enjoying this program? Stay with us.
Levanta-te, ó Deus, levanta-te, ó Deus. Levanta-te, ó Deus, levanta-te, ó Deus. Que seus inimigos fujam, enquanto os justos se alegram. Sim, celebrem com alegria a vitória do Senhor. Levanta-te, ó Deus, levanta-te, ó Deus. Levanta-te, ó Deus, levanta-te, ó Deus. Que seus inimigos fujam.
Continuando o nosso programa,
Continue with our
nós
program.
vamos falar nesse bloco
We will
pouco
talk in this session
sobre a
about
continuidade, a perpetuidade de Israel como nação
the perpetuity
sacerdotal.
of Israel as a priestly nation in the promise of the new covenant which God made by the mouth of the prophet Jeremiah. Let's read Jeremiah chapter 31 from 31 to 33, which says,
Eis que vem dias,
Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, that they broke my covenant, though I was their husband, declares the Lord. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law, my Torah, within them, and I will write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they shall be my people.
Primeiramente, a gente tem que entender
First of all,
o que é a nova
we have
aliança,
to
né?
understand what is the new covenant. Because new covenant everyone believes, but few of them know what this really talks about. For many, the new covenant is a set of book of 27 books, which form the so-called New Testament. For others, the new covenant is a new pact that God will make,
três coisas.
and also three things.
Despejaria, vamos dizer assim, Israel
Will
de seu
dispense
compromisso,
Israel of its
substituiria
commitment, of its
Israel
covenant,
por novo
will
povo, que é a
replace
igreja, assim
Israel
chamada igreja,
for a new people, which is the
a
church,
desobrigação de que essa igreja
and the release of this
precisasse cumprir a
church
Torá, porque a salvação agora
in
é pela
obey
graça.
the Torah,
Isso aí que é a nova
and the
aliança
salvation is now
para
by
as pessoas,
grace.
para o
So
cristianismo.
this
Mas,
is
na
what the
verdade, a
new
nova
covenant to the
aliança
people and for the
antes de
Christianity.
tudo,
But in fact,
a
the
colocação
new covenant
da
before
Torá,
all
lá no
is the
hebraico
placement
fala,
of the
Torá
Torah.
aqui,
In
minha
Hebrew
lei
says, my Torah,
colocarei
my law,
nos seus
I will
corações
put
e as inscreverei. Isso
in
é a nova
their
aliança.
hearts, and
A
I
nova
will
aliança
write it.
é
This
evento
is the new
profético,
covenant. The new
prometido
covenant
por Deus
is
através
a
de
prophetic
Jeremias e outros
event
profetas,
promised by God through
que
Jeremiah
vislumbrava
and other
período quando
prophets,
Deus
who saw a
circuncidaria
period
o
when
coração
God
do seu povo
will
como um
circumcise the
todo, por
heart
meio
of
da
his
ação do
people
Ruach
as a
HaKodesh.
whole through the
Essa nova
action
aliança
of the
seria
Ruach HaKodesh.
intermediada
This
por
new
Mashiach
covenant will
e
be
concedida
mediated by
ao
the
povo
Mashiach
judeu.
and
Por
given
isso,
to the
aqui,
Jewish
no
people.
versículo
And that's why
31,
here
está
at the verse
bastante claro.
31,
Virão
behold,
dias,
the
diz o
days
Senhor, em
are
que
coming,
com
declares
a
the Lord,
casa
when with the
de
house
Israel e a casa
of
de
Israel
Judá, lembrando que
and
Israel
with the
se
house
refere
of
à tribo do
Judah,
norte, Judá,
remembering
tribo do
that
sul,
Israel
ou seja, o
refers
povo
to
de
the
Israel
tribe
como
of
todo,
north and
com
the tribe
esse
of south. In
povo
other words,
é que a
the
nova
people of
aliança
Israel as whole.
deveria ser
With
feita.
these people
Como
is
o
the
povo
new
judeu.
covenant
Então, a
should
nova
be
aliança
made.
não exclui
So the
o
new
povo judeu.
covenant does
A nova
not
aliança
exclude
é
the Jewish
com
people.
o
The
povo
new
judeu, mais
covenant
ninguém.
is with the Jewish people and anyone else.
Veja
Moreover,
bem, é isso que as pessoas às vezes
and
não se
many
ligam.
people don't pay
Esse
attention.
mesmo texto, você
The
vai
same
encontrar
text,
referência dele
you will find the
nos
reference
escritos
of it in the
históricos da
historical
Brit Hadashah, no livro de
writings
Hebreus,
of the Brit
falando dessa
Hadashah,
aliança
in the book of
e
Hebrews, talking about
repetindo
this
que
covenant and repeating
seria com a Torá
that it will be with the
dos
Torah.
mais importantes
And one of the
itens
most
dessa nova
important
aliança, se não
items
mais
in this new
importante,
covenant, or
seria a
even the
Torá
most
nos corações,
important,
porque o
should
que
be
foi
the Torah in their
violado
hearts.
pelo povo,
Because
né? A
what
aliança
was
do povo obedecia a
violated by the
Torá.
people, the
Então agora essa
covenant in obey the
renovação era
Torah,
para que
then
fosse
this
cumprida a Torá.
renewal was to fulfill the
Você citou uma
Torah.
coisa
You had
importante, que é a
mentioned
aliança
an important
anterior.
thing
No
that
capítulo
is the
24
previous
de Êxodo
covenant.
está relatado
In
que
chapter
o povo
24
falou
of
para
Exodus
Deus e
is
a Moisés,
recorded
dizendo
that
o
the
seguinte:
people said to God
tudo que
and to
falou o
Moses,
Eterno
saying,
faremos e
everything
obedeceremos.
that the Lord has said,
Moshe
we
pegou
will do
o
and we will
sangue
obey.
daqueles
Moses
animais,
took the blood of
derramou
those
sobre o
animals,
altar,
sprinkled
derramou
on the
sobre o povo e disse,
altar, on
"Esse
the
é o sangue
people,
da
and
aliança
said,
de Deus
this is the blood of the
convosco em
covenant
relação
of God
a
with
essa
you,
promessa." Que
related to
promessa?
this promise.
Que o
Which
nosso povo
promise?
seria
That
fiel à
our
Torá.
people will be faithful to the
nosso
Torah.
povo, parte
These
dele,
are
digamos
people,
assim,
or part of
não
them,
cumpriu
let's
com
say
essa
like
promessa.
that, didn't
Ao
obey
invés
this
de
promise.
Deus
Instead of God,
destituí-lo de
dismiss
sua
them
condição
as
de
his
povo, o
people.
que Deus fez?
What did
Deus
God?
concedeu ao
God
nosso
gave
povo
to our
a
people
oportunidade de
the
conhecer
opportunity to
o
know
Mashiach
the Mashiach
e receber o
and
Espírito Santo
receive
que
the
os
Holy
conduziria
Spirit,
na
which
prática da
will
Torá.
guide them
Tá.
in the
Mas a
practice of
gente
the
não
Torah.
vai estar enfatizando
But today
bem a
we'll
questão
not
da prática, tá? Mas
emphasize
é um
the
item,
practice of the Torah. but it's one item. The granting of the Holy Spirit is another item inside the new covenant. So the new covenant, in any way, is the creation of a new religion by Jewish leaders, and after will deliver it in the hands of Gentiles, and these Gentiles will take a different path that had nothing to do with the Torah, with the ordinance and Jewish practice. So it is what understood today as being the New Covenant or the New Testament. What you said is not the New Covenant. What you said is apostasy. The apostasy did that, gave to the Gentiles. Actually, the increment, Roshishai, of the Gentiles after the death of the apostles was exactly what triggered all this theology now believed for the majority of the Christians. But in fact, this is apostasy, not new covenant. The new covenant is the renewal with the Jewish people. Other detail. God made a covenant with the house of Judah and with the house of Israel. A part of our people didn't accept. In the interpretation of Shaul HaShaliah, the Apostle Paul, a part of our people is hardened, is blinded to understand, could not reach. As many of the Jewish people in Yeshua's time reached, saw in him the new covenant, the Mashiach, and the fulfillment of the prophecy. A small part didn't see it, but this small part represented the leaders of that time, those who managed to carry forward this idea, but the majority, or a great part, what also includes the priests, many of them, let's say,
então houve ali, vamos dizer, uma bifurcação.
There was a bifurcation. God made this covenant, but a part of our people didn't accept, was hardened according to Paul, and the other part accept. We are talking about a priestly nation, an everlasting nation. How was the continuity of this priesthood with this bifurcation occurred in Yeshua's time? A part composed by the leaders don't accept Yeshua and his teaching, is still with their own vision, and the other part submit itself to the new covenant, open their hearts and start to obey God. And unfortunately, there another division between those who went to the apostasy, and in this case, the great part and a small part was preserved by God when went to the desert and survived in the desert for 1,260 years. But how is the continuity of Israel as the priestly nation in these 2,000 years? Do not change absolutely anything. Israel is still being the priestly nation of God. First of all, we have to understand that do not exist two people, do not have two Israels. Do not have two people of Israel. There is only one Jewish people, only one people of Israel. Part of these people, that the great majority of that people in that time who knew the Torah and knew the prophets, accept the Mashiach. And a small part, the priestly class, to it, the word of Jeremiah chapter 29, God gave the spirit of deep sleep, eyes to not see and ears to hear not, because they approached God with words, but their hearts were far away from God. To those God punished, not permitting them to see Mashiach for a time, and the other part, the sincere part, well know of the Torah, and that act says that to those not knowing the law and the prophets, took Yeshua to death or collaborated to his death. Taking out of these ones, all the others believed. But to those who not believed in Mashiach, with the diaspora, they have continued to the Jewish faith and have continued to the Torah. Moreover, the priestly class was devoid and scattered. But the Pharisaic class, that was the most zealous class of that time, and it was what we know today as the rabbinical Judaism, is is the retainer, the representative of the religious culture and the Jewish identity in these last 2,000 years. And it is doing this role very well, regardless of the fact that the rabbinical Judaism conceives the idea that Yeshua can be the Messiah. This not devote then of them priestly condition. Therefore, the Apostle Paul is speaking to the Romans in chapter 9 and 11, is still saying that they are the God's people. In chapter 9, we say that in previous program, he said, to them it belong. He put like that in that time. In that time, had already the negation of some, but he said, to them belong the worship, the promise, the covenant, the Torah, the Mashiach, the forefathers. And I think funny because the Mashiach itself belongs to them. This is another topic that Mashiach is a Jewish issue. Mashiach is not a Christian issue, it's not a Gentile issue. Mashiach is a Jewish topic and only can be understood by the Jewish point of view. So, the Jewish people is still being priestly, not being devoid of its condition of priest. But now, we believe that the Jewish people consists in how many parts? Of two parts. One part represented by the rabbinical Judaism, the holders of the Torah teachings, and the Jewish culture, and the other part, as we call the Judaism of the New Covenant, which we are part. Being a descendant of Jews or not by the flesh, it is made a conversion process, and through the New Covenant, take all the covenant. This represents us because we believe in Mashiach, holders of the prophecy and the announcing of the God of Israel to the nations, and is in this what we believe. Let's clarify this to our friends who are watching us. We have an allusion of this fact in the readings of the Brit Hadashah, in the book of Revelation, the last book, in chapter 11, which mentioned about two witnesses. We have here, in chapter 11, talking about these two witnesses. In the verse 3 says that they will prophesy for 1,260 days, and we understand it as 1,260 prophetic years, will be only 3 years and a half. It is a short time, and then we go to a prophetic understanding, and says that they are two olive trees. In verse 4, they are two olive trees and two candlesticks, which are before the God of earth, and the verse 6 somehow identifies them, and we will read. They have the power to shut the sky, that no rain may fall during the days of their prophesying, and they have power over the waters to turn them into blood, and to strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they desire. They are two witnesses. The two ones have power to do two things. One, have the power to shut the sky. It's a clear reference to Elijah. Who was Elijah? Eliyahu, a prophet who prophesies against Israel, who prophesies against Acab, against the transgression of Israel, who made the rain cease and was persecuted by Jezebel. And the other prophet who has power over the waters to turn them into blood, and to strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as his desire, is Moshe Rabbeinu. So we have here a clear allusion, my friend, that these two witnesses are represented by two prophets, Moses and Elijah. So it fits very well in what we are speaking. Look, many times people came and asked to us why the rabbinical Judaism does not preach. They have television programs, but talking about the community, the social aspect of the community, not teaching about religion. Religion, the rabbinical Judaism definitely today does not
Por
do
quê?
proselytism.
Porque
Why?
ele exerce o papel de
Because
Moisés.
they do the
E é o
rule of
papel-
Moses. And
Qual
what
foi o
was
principal
Moses'
papel de
duty?
Moisés?
Ensinar o seu
Teach
próprio
his
povo,
own people,
ensinar
teach
a
the Torah,
e levar
and
o
lead
povo
the
judeu
Jewish
ao
people to
conhecimento
the
de Deus
knowledge of
através
God
da Torá.
through the
Preservar a Torá.
Torah.
Foi o
This
trabalho de
was
Moisés.
the Moses'
O povo
duty.
judeu,
The Jewish
até
people,
hoje,
until
né,
now,
o judaísmo
the
rabínico
rabbinical
representando essa
Judaism
ala do povo
representing
judeu,
this side of the Jewish
tem
people
sido
has
o
been the
guardião da
holders
Torá.
of the Torah.
Né? Se nós temos hoje a
If we
Torá, o
have the Torah
Pentateuco,
today, the
íntegro,
whole
integralmente,
Pentateuch,
né? Se nós
if
temos aí
we
o
have the
Tanar
Tanakh
em si,
itself,
todo o chamado
called the
Antigo
Old
Testamento,
Testament,
na íntegra. Se nós
if we
pegarmos a
take the
Bíblia
Bible
como
today,
Bíblia
well
hoje,
known
com
as
seus
it is,
67
with its
livros,
66
66
books,
livros, sendo
being
39
39
do chamado
belonging
Velho
to the
Testamento,
Tanakh,
27 do
the
Novo,
Old
nós
Testament,
vamos ver
and 27
desses
of the
dois
New
blocos de
Testament,
livros,
we
o
will
único
see that from these two
praticamente não
parts,
sofreu
the only one
nenhuma
which
alteração,
didn't suffer any
nenhuma
alteration,
adulteração,
any change,
praticamente
was practically
Tanar,
the
chamado
Tanakh,
Velho
the Old Testament.
Porque o Novo
Because the New
Testamento
Testament
tem
has so
muitas
many
contradições.
contradictions. We have to
Vocês
admit.
creem no Novo
Do we
Testamento?
believe
Nós
in the New
cremos no Novo
Testament?
Testamento.
Yes, we
Sim.
believe in the New Testament
Como
as
documentos históricos,
historical documents,
preciosos,
as important
sem os quais
documents,
nós não teríamos
as
a
without
história
it we will
da
not
implantação
have
da
or
nova aliança.
even know the history
Né?
of the implementation
Mas são
of the new
documentos
covenant.
históricos, não são
But they are
documentos,
historical documents.
canônicos, não são
They are not
documentos
canonic documents.
inerrantes.
They can have mistakes.
Não tinha
They
esse
did not
caráter quando
have
foram
this
escritos.
feature
Os
when they were
escritores do
written.
assim
The
chamado Novo
writers
Testamento,
of the
desse
so-called
acervo
New Testament, of
de
this
documentos,
collection
não tinham a
of
intenção
documents, they
de
did
que
have the
esses textos,
intention
por sua
of
vez, tivessem
making
um
this
caráter,
text so important
que se
as
atribui a eles no dia
today
de hoje.
attached
Tinha
to
esse
it.
objetivo. O
They
objetivo
didn't
deles
have
era
this aim.
registrar
Their
a
aim
passagem de
was
Yeshua
recorded the
pelo povo de
Yeshua's
Deus na
time
terra,
on earth,
registrar seus
recorded
milagres,
his
registrar
miracles,
seu
recorded
ministério,
his
registrar
ministry,
aquilo que
and
precisaria
recorded
ser
what
feito
was
para que a
possible to
posteridade
make
tomasse
it
conhecimento
well
Eu quero
known
de sua
about his
existência
existence
e
and the
da
existence of his
dele.
Kehillah.
E o que eu
This
quero
was the
acrescentar
goal.
ainda
What I
é
want
que,
to add it
em
yet
não
is that
tendo a
not having the
obrigatoriedade de
obligation
ser
to be
inerrante,
right or
qualquer
without
falha que
mistakes,
exista
any
nesses
fault
escritos
that
são
exists
perfeitamente
in these
compreensíveis.
writings, they
E
are
o povo
perfectly
judeu, nosso povo, usa
understandable.
até
And
hoje,
the
por
Jewish
exemplo, livros
people,
como o de
our
Macabeus,
people, use these
para
until
contar
now
a sua
some
história,
books,
para
as
a
for
celebração de
example, the book of
Hanukkah,
Maccabees,
sem
to
problema
tell
algum.
its story,
Macabeus
to
não faz
celebrate
parte
the
do
feast
Tanakh.
of Hanukkah.
Mas nem por
Maccabees
isso é
does not
desacreditado.
belong to the
Não,
Tanakh,
é
but even
importante.
so, it
Os
is
escritos da Brit
discredited
Hadashah
or
são escritos
important.
importantes,
The writings of the
históricos,
Brit
documentos
Hadashah are
históricos
important writings.
necessários,
They are
essenciais,
necessary, they are
não é?
essentials.
Agora, o que
But
acontece?
what happens?
Então, nós temos aí
We have
o povo de
here
Israel
the people of
representando
Israel,
o judaísmo rabínico,
the rabbinical
representando
Judaism
Moshe,
representing
preservando
Moses,
esses
preserving these writings,
preservando as
preserving the
tradições do povo
traditions
judeu,
of the Jewish people,
preservando a cultura
preserving
do
the
povo
Jewish
judeu.
Até para
culture,
que essa
even for
parte
this
do
part of
Israel que
Israel
aceitou a
which
nova aliança,
accept the new
e que
covenant,
seria
which should
mandada
be
para o
sent to the
deserto,
wilderness
seria
and will be
preservada,
preserved
e que
and will
perderia, por
lost
sua vez,
its
sua
reference,
referência, pudesse também
could
voltar.
also return.
Se o povo judeu,
If the Jewish
mesmo
people,
representado
which is
na figura do judaísmo
represented by the
rabínico,
rabbinical
deixasse de existir,
Judaism, cease to
também a
exist,
congregação de
also
Yeshua
the
deixaria de
congregation of
existir.
Yeshua will cease
Da
to
mesma forma
exist.
que,
At the same
se a
way
congregação de Yeshua
that if the congregation of
deixasse de existir
Yeshua
por completo,
will cease to exist
se fosse
completely,
verdade que a
if it
apostasia
was true that the
exterminou
apostasy
completamente com a
wiped
congregação
out
de Yeshua,
the
e que
congregation
ela
of
deixou de
Yeshua
existir,
and no
também
longer
o povo
exists
judeu,
through the
através do
rabbinical
judaísmo
Judaism,
rabínico,
and
não poderia hoje
also
tomar
the Jewish
conhecimento de
people
Mashiach,
could not
porque essa
get
pregação
know about
vem
Mashiach
justamente dessa
because
parte.
this
E
preaching
a
comes
parte
from
de
us,
Elias,
and the Elijah's
representa a
duty,
parte que
which
profetiza, que
represents
fala,
the part
que
that
ensina,
prophesies,
que
which
ministra
speaks,
a
who
Torá,
teach the Torah,
e representa,
which
então,
represents
a
the
congregação que está
congregation
fazendo
today.
isso hoje. Mas nós
But
vamos
we are going to
continuar no
talk about
próximo
this
programa.
in the next
Continue
program.
conosco.
Stay with us. If you like this program, you can see the information on the screen.
אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא להתנסה בחפצו כל
www.israelitas.com.br
אחרי
Israeli Congregation of the New Covenant. Curitiba, Paraná, Brazil.